Hey everyone, I'm Ryan Lizza with Telus News here with G. Elliott Morris. Um, Elliott, everything you've been doing on the run up to the election and the post-election analysis has been fantastic. So thanks for doing this at the end of the week to help everyone understand what actually happened on Tuesday. Um, there's so much incorrect information in the immediate aftermath, especially on election night when everyone's trying to come up with some big takeaway. And I think the fact that the polls were so much tighter than the final results colored a lot of analysis. It takes some time for people to realize that New Jersey wasn't actually close at all. It was, basically landslide territory. And so I really want to just do our best to sweep aside some of the bad takes, misinformation, misinformed understandings of what happened uh, Tuesday, and also some of in my experience, having been doing this now for quite a long time, there is a common takeaway where people overinterpret a single election and they predict long-term trends based on one midterm, one presidential election, one off-year election. And so just sort of hit that sweet spot of what actually mattered, what didn't, and what are the big takeaways. I want to start by quoting from your most recent piece this morning,
Oh no.
sort of poo-pooing the idea that this was a realignment, and we can help help viewers define that term realignment, which people throw around all the time without necessarily understanding what it means. But you say it is clear now that claims of a fundamental realignment of American politics have been highly exaggerated. The 2024 election is best seen as an anti-incumbent election stemming from economic anxiety, most but not entirely driven by rising inflation during Joe Biden's presidency. The elections held this week were a continuation of the anti-incumbent sentiment from last year, this time directed towards the new party in charge. The biggest difference between 2024 and 2025 is that Republicans are running the country now instead of the Democrats. All right, with that long introduction, take it away.
That's a quote.
Where should we start?
Yeah, okay, thanks, Ryan. I mean, look, I think there's a couple ways to interpret the outcome on Tuesday. I have been thinking about it for this article I wrote this morning as a rebuttal to the idea that, Donald Trump remade the political map, that he had a so-called realignment. That's why the word is in scare quotes in the title of my article. And like, this is in some ways a corrective I've been wanting to write for a while, and now we have the actual electoral evidence to buttress that analysis. But we really actually didn't need the result on Tuesday to say this. And the case that I want to make to people is that in order to really qualify as a realignment in politics, you have to have, well, typically there has been three things. And so in the elections I'm thinking about here, we're thinking about like 1932, 1980, and then maybe arguably 2010 in the GOP direction, but it's not a presidential year, so that's kind of tough. And the three things are, you have to have a pretty large swing against the party in power, not 6 points, which is what we saw in 2024, but more like, 10 or 15. Like a real, a real indictment of the way the incumbents have been running the country. Second, you need some actual realignment at the subgroup level. And this isn't, 10 points. This is more like 4 or 5 groups moving 20 or 30 points in the opposite direction. And crucially, the third thing is they have to stay there. A realignment is no realignment if people are bouncing back and forth. And so, like maybe Donald Trump has one of those things. In 2024, you can say he has the second. He has some major inroads with Latinos and voters making less than $50,000 a year, especially white ones. Um, but uh, but we should ask ourselves, like, are these inroads that he's making actually uh, a, a a product of something about Donald Trump, or are there external shocks going on here, something exogenous to the electoral environment that any Republican would have done well under, and that thing is probably inflation. So, that is what's coloring in my brain. That's what's priming my reaction to the election results on Tuesday, and we get evidence that the thing that had been conditioning the supposed realignment was anti-incumbent sentiment from poor economic growth or from inflation or whatever you really want to call it. Um, and then, the very important thing here, the thing I've been writing about on my Substack for a while is that if 2024 is an anti-incumbent election, not a realignment in the Republican direction, then in 2025 and 2026, you're going to have a really large backlash against the new incumbent, the Republican Party. And that shouldn't be called a realignment in favor of the Democrats. It should be called what it actually is, which is voters are pissed off. They don't feel like they're getting what they need to get out of their government, and they're going to punish the people who are in charge. And honestly, it's really that simple. This is like poli-sci. It's like poli-sci 101 figure right.
So, I mean, in a sense, it makes the results a little less interesting, and it makes it difficult for either party to um, uh, to be sure that they have any sort of stable coalition. But do you? And I want to look a little bit more at some of the granular data. You probably saw the Wall Street Journal graph today and map of they had a New Jersey map with the change in Democratic Party vote share from 2020 to 2024 to 2025, and just showing the exact swing that you're talking about. Um, and with the groups that the proponents of realignment on the Republican side always point to, which is Hispanics, uh, some element of Black voters, and working class voters. Um, what could you say about those groups and the groups that are driving the shift in and let's just stick with the Trump era, or just stick with 2020 to 2024 to last year. What are the groups driving that, and are they any different than historical? I think the poli-sci term is thermostatic elections.
Yeah, there's I mean the real kicker here, Ryan, is that the groups that moved most towards Trump from 2020 to 2024 are the groups that have moved most against him between 2024 and 2025. So, you're referencing these maps in New Jersey. One of the localities in New Jersey that's really notable is Union City. And I pulled up the results here. In 2024, voters in Union City cast their ballots at a 17 percentage point margin for Kamala Harris for president, with close to, doing math on the fly, 19,000 votes total. Um, this year, they voted for Mikey Sherrill by 70 percentage points. Technically 68.8 if you are being a stickler, and they cast more ballots than they did in 2024. So those voters are both energized and they've moved about 50 percentage points in the Democratic direction. This is a predominantly Hispanic
Say that
area.
again. How many
New Jersey.
points?
50. Um, and this is a city in New Jersey with 82% Hispanic population. So that's kind of cherry picking, to be fair. If you look at the
Yeah.
exit polls, that this shift is probably closer to 20 points, 50 points, but either way, it's huge. And it's huge among the groups that, the realignment theorists and Donald Trump and Stephen Miller claimed were remaking the Republican coalition in favor of the working class, sort of non-white majority. Um, and if we can repeat this analysis with the exit polls. Black voters moved 11% back towards the Democrats from last year to this year. Asian voters, at least I'm talking about Virginia here, they moved 42 percentage points back in the Democratic direction. And voters who made less than $50,000 per year moved 18 percentage points back in the Democratic direction. Oh, also young people, a 22 percentage point swing. So the other groups, that aren't necessarily key to sort of this mythology about the 2024 election, white voters, older voters making, more money per year, they've moved in the Democratic direction, but by less. So there's been a concentrated swing among the groups that Trump was saying was going to sort of power a Republican majority for many years to come. And it has, this has eroded in a year. So like how much staying power does this supposed realignment really have? Sort of the big question.
What would you what just to get away from the some of the nitty-gritty demographic shifts, um, what do you make of the traditional post-election fight between the wings of the two parties in terms of what these election results tell you about the leftward trajectory or moderate trajectory of the Democrats, or the MAGA direction, or the more centrist direction of the Republican Party? Do you think they say much about what candidates on either side should be doing in the midterms next year?
Well, what I'm really arguing here in the 2024 context can be applied to the 2025 context as well. And that is that there is a tendency for pundits, political analysts, especially ideologically motivated ones, to dramatically overinterpret election results, and to see the results as affirmations of trends that they would sort of like to see for their theories of why the electorate makes the decisions that they make. Again, in
Yeah.
2024, this is sort of the realignment theorist, but in 2025, this might be. Yeah, I think you can pick many factions in the Democratic Party who are going to claim victory. Moderates are going to claim victory, or sort of the pro-moderation crowd will say, they're not necessarily moderates. They're going to say Mikey Sherrill, Abigail Spanbergers, their huge victories prove Democrats do well when moderates run. Yeah, ideological progressives, especially from the sort of working class persuasion, they're going to say Democrats do best when they run just sort of progressive candidates who speak to affordability crisis, and get turnout increases with young people. Um, and they're both right. Because the thing that people need to realize is that it's not a sort of left versus right appeal. What we see in 2025 is not a real battle of ideological progressivism and and moderation in the Democratic Party. It's it is this affordability agenda. It's that 42% of people in Virginia and about 55% in New Jersey said that the economy or taxes was the most important issue. And those people, they previously voted for Donald Trump by about 65 points, and they voted for Democratic candidates by 40 or 30, excuse me. And that's the real big shift that we've seen. And again, this is just anti-incumbent economic anxiety all the way down. And people would be wrong to cast 2025 as a realignment in the Democratic direction, just like I think they were wrong to cast 2024 as a realignment in the Republican direction.
Is there anything to say about the voters that came into the system in the last decade, maybe because of Donald Trump, and whether they are particularly swingy because they are new voters, maybe have loose attachments or maybe had a loose attachment to him, or is it really not that different than the pre-Trump era in terms of the economy driving big swings from a presidential to an off year to a midterm?
Are you asking about young voters in particular, or
Well,
just
I'm
sort of
thinking. I think correct me if I'm wrong, but the Trump brought in a lot of first-time voters, or people who didn't vote regularly, and did well with them
yeah.
in both of his victories, at least. And correct me if I'm wrong about this, but they are in some of the groups that we talk about, that the sort of pro realignment folks talk about on the right, Hispanics, some small portion of Black voters, working class voters. Is that just a new swing group that he helped bring into American politics because of his celebrity and all the weirdness about Trump? People who didn't pay attention before, and they're just turning out to be um, more regular participants, but it turns out they just don't have strong attachments to Trump after all. Or is that not really the story, and we're just looking at swing voters swing the same way they always have?
Yeah, this is great. Well, I asked about young people because I think that this does apply to young people. They do have loose partisan attachments and they can be more malleable. There's some really great studies in American politics looking at the effect of presidential approval ratings and elections on party ID among people who are, less than 30 years old and who are voting for the first time. And events that happen when these people are young do have enduring, long-term effects for the way that those voters feel and how they vote.
Mm.
So that's true for them. And in that light, Trump's gains with young people are almost like less impressive because they're more willing to move to the left or to the right. Uh, but actually, I'm gonna try to draw a chart live on Substack Live here. So I think
One of
there's
the
a tendency.
limitations of this
Let's see
app.
if this works. Oh, it's in the wrong direction because it's flipped.
Yeah.
But you can imagine this is actually left for me. Yeah, you can imagine us like trying to put all of voters onto, and this is a very bad bell curve, onto some sort of curve here, hypothesizing that there's some critical mass of voters in the middle that you need to like seek out. And the way that Trump in this world, the way that Trump wins the election is by moving his ideological ideal point, right? His conservatism from the edge to the middle, and he wins the election. I think this is the wrong way to think about it. I think we should be thinking about. I've been trying to work out exactly how to put voters on this ideological space. We should be thinking about voters as existing on both a left-right spectrum and a disengaged and engaged spectrum, where really engaged voters are here on the bottom and disengaged voters are here on the top. So, what my hypothesis is that is sort of up here in this corner is where Democrats have traditionally done well with low turnout voters who are really sensitive to economics, and that this is like the Obama 2012 and potentially a little bit of the highest turnout ever 2024 Democratic coalition, and that these voters are the ones that Trump captures right here, the disengaged liberal voters, the ones that he captures in 2024 by speaking to the concerns that disengaged voters have. And it's not a left-right thing; it's an anti-system. It's politics working for me, economic anxiety sort of thing. And the really left-leaning voters, they're never moving. The really right-leaning voters, they're never moving. Um, but there's a bunch of people on the top of this plot that have very loose ideological attachments that are up for grabs. And the,
Mm.
and the way that you grab them is by speaking to their concerns. It doesn't have to be an ideologically coded message. Now, so that's all to say we saw the biggest shifts on Tuesday night among young people, among the poorest Americans, and the most marginalized Americans in terms of the power that they wield in our politics. And many of those people are politically disengaged because of those reasons. But we saw Democrats do well with them regardless of their ideology, regardless of where they are on the left-right spectrum. That's Zoran Mamdani winning from the very left. It's Abigail Spanberger, Mikey Sherrill winning from sort of the center left, um, and some sheriffs, winning from the center right or the center um, in the Democratic direction here. So, uh, yeah, I just think that the sort of left versus center debate is really missing the crucial aspect of what's going to make the Democrats successful going forward, or what could make them successful going forward. And that's sort of speaking to this critical mass of voters who really don't have firm ideological attachments and just tell us that they want a government that works for them and delivers for the working class. And it doesn't have to be a left versus right thing. It's a authenticity, policy deliverism thing.
What would you so all right, knowing that, what do you if you were to design a Democratic presidential candidate in a lab, what would they look and sound like in terms of keeping the partisans in their coalition and winning the decisive chunk of these new swing voters you've described?
I think the problem with trying to come up with an answer is sort of the problem with the question. I mean, Democrats weren't that far off from their peak in the coalition in 2020 with Biden as the nominee. And in 2024, with much of the same policy prescriptions, including a lot more policy outputs focused on the working class,
Yeah.
and lots of infrastructure development that helps all Americans, and trying to curb the perversities of inflation that really impacts lower income Americans, right? Like you get Kamala Harris, in an inflation environment that pushes Democrats, closer to the nadir of their electoral performance over the last 20 years. So actually, I don't really think it's about who the leader of the party is. It's sort of what's the party's reputation? What have they been fighting for over the last 3 or 4 years before that presidential election? And very importantly, are the conditions in the country such that a Democrat could do well? In 2024, Democrats aren't winning regardless of regardless of who their party leader is. It's just not happening. And
It's
so
an
this is,
anti-incumbent election, just like so many in so many other democracies around the world where incumbents lost because of inflation, whether they were on the right or the left.
yeah, and if you compare the swing against the incumbent party in the U.S. to the swing against the incumbent party in the average democracy in 2024, Kamala Harris is actually doing about twice as well as you expect.
Hmm.
The U.S. moves 6 points in the Republican direction from 2020 to 2024. The average swing against the incumbent party is closer to 12.
Hmm.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Um, Sorry, someone tried to call me.
I saw. Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. No worries.
Okay,
Well, this raises a question.
so
Yeah, go ahead.
so she does disproportionately well. So who would you rather have who would you have put in the Democratic seat in 2024 to try to make up, those basically 2 percentage points that Democrats would have to win back? And that's like a lot of votes. And I'll just sort of make a slight critique here. There is a tendency for us to think that politics happens in a lab, and you pick the right candidate, and you pick the right
Right.
message, and voters
Yeah.
come along. And this isn't what you're doing. That's why you asked the question, because you're setting me up. And I think what's wrong here is that too many strategists think about politics is happening in a lab, and it's not in a lab where you can isolate all these variables and pick the right candidate and control for
Yeah.
environments. It's all messy. It's overdetermined, as we like to say. It's very, very complex.
Yeah. One thought that I had in reading your analysis about, and I think you're spot on about the driver of this election, is it made me think back to 2022 when the Democrats did surprisingly well, um, for a midterm, and the economy was, maybe I'm just misremembering the sort of state of inflation and the economy, but is there anything, does that election look like a bit of an outlier given this pretty clear seesaw that we're seeing in the era of inflation?
Sorry, which election were you talking about?
Biden's midterm,
Oh, sure.
2022.
Yeah.
Biden,
Midterms.
yeah,
Yeah, the midterms are in 2022 are weird because there is a pretty large swing against the Democratic Party at the House level. Republicans win the House popular vote by 2 points right after Biden wins the election by 4 and 4.5. Actually, somewhat miraculously, this is very similar to the swing from 2020 to 2024 at the presidential level. The midterms really predicted what was going to happen, at least in the House popular vote. But this isn't interpreted as a sort of dominant Republican victory. First, because they don't flip that many seats, because they have a bad distribution of voters in off-year cycles. Their voters aren't very engaged, and especially in the seats that matter, there's an overrepresentation of white and higher engagement voters, partly because they matter. But the most important thing is that the Senate seat wins by Democrat, sort of muddy the interpretation of the 2022 election. Actually, I think if analysts had paid a little more attention to the House results in 2022 and less on the Senate results, it probably would have pointed them in a closer direction.
So you don't think
But
it's an outlier in terms of the swinging against the incumbent in the era of inflation story?
Well,
That is
inflation really, I mean, people can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the brunt of the impact for public opinion on inflation happens
later.
sort of later in 2022 and mostly in 2023. So it's
Okay, well that explains it
quite
then.
a, not quite
Yeah,
as dominant. And remember, there's also a very bad recruitment problem for the Republicans in 2022. They pick a lot of very bad candidates. Doug Mastriano in
yep,
Pennsylvania at the governor level. I guess now Senator Dave McCormick. Sorry, it was Oz, wasn't it? And
yeah.
also now in government. And Blake Masters, puzzlingly not in government as far as I'm aware so far. All terrible candidates on the Republican side. It's sort of muddy the interpretation of the election and make it seem, I think, better for Democrats than it was.
One of the things that a lot of Democrats have been trying to figure out, and a lot of folks who hang out on Substack where we live, is um, how much to focus on inflation, bread and butter economic issues, and how much to focus on what a lot of people who are not fond of Trump see as an emergency in our democracy, and all the issues around Trump's accretion of power in the executive branch that's unprecedented. His weaponization of the Justice Department, his just trampling norms of government that long people who have spent a lot of time in Washington really care about, and how much just all the things that we put in the basket of eroding democratic norms, authoritarianism. Um, what what can you say about those issues and how much they drove this swing against Trump versus the economy? I mean, we say the election was about the economy. I can't remember an election that wasn't about the economy.
So
um,
that's fair
and
enough.
so, but I know these things are very hard to disentangle. But there are a lot of folks like me who often wonder why there aren't more people in the streets, frankly, why there aren't more people deeply, deeply concerned about what Trump is doing to the government, what he's doing to our democracy, um, and based on that, would predict a sizable swing against him. Um, but, you're saying, and I think you're right, that it's basically about inflation. And, if the incumbent doesn't do something about inflation, they lose. And that's the world we've been living in for a while. But say something to tell us what if you can disentangle these other things and how much it might inform Democrats about the democracy agenda that a lot of us think is really, really important.
Yeah, I don't have any data from the exit polls on the democracy issue. In particular, just what I can say is, 48% of people said the economy was their number one concern in the exit poll in Virginia. It's closer to 40%, I think maybe 38 in the New Jersey exit poll. 21% of people say healthcare. And if YouGov does a great job of this every week with their polls with The Economist. They also ask, what's the most important issue in American politics today? Before the election, just in their surveys, it's also the economy. Now, there has been an increase in the percent of people who say civil rights is the most important issue today, and that sort of maps on, I think, to some of our anxieties about, erosion of democratic norms and values, and
Yeah,
who's
sure. I
for
mean,
that, for that matter.
if you care about, ICE agents, descending from helicopters and raiding apartment buildings in Chicago, and a pollster asks you about, and they list civil rights on the list, that might jump up.
Yeah.
Um,
So that would lead me to think, that our normal theories about, and I'm just pulling up this UW Economist stuff here, that our normal theories about how voters are making their decisions are still holding, even if there are sort of other issues that are more important now than they used to be. Most voters are still concerned about their personal well-being, the problems that are really close to home, sort of kitchen table stuff. And for those Americans who are really paying attention, the democracy stuff can seem scary. But yeah, I guess I don't see a whole lot of evidence that there's a sort of anti-Trump, anti-authoritarianism, uh, pro-democracy, lowercase d, democratic coalition that isn't already moved by inflation concerns. Essentially,
Yeah.
they're very correlated.
Well, it's interesting. So then, if you're, I'm thinking Trump is meeting with Viktor Orban today, and I'm just thinking the extent to which Orban's playbook was, um, he actually presided. He came to power because the economy sucked, and he presided over an improvement of the economy, and um, things that he did actually made a difference, right? And so, because he was able to improve the economy, a lot of Hungarians looked the other way as their democracy eroded, um, and I wonder if one sort of storm cloud in the election results Tuesday is that if Trump were a more effective steward of the economy, and if he actually did something about inflation, then uh, he might Republicans might have fared better, and he might fare better in the midterms. All the other stuff being equal, and that's actually a sort of um, playbook that um, he could still use.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm saying is there's not, you're saying is there's just not that much evidence in these results that those other issues drove um, the key voters.
Yeah, well, let's think. So
Like,
if
what are
you do the
the
math,
implications of that? Seem really, to me at least, really troubling.
well, certainly a long history. There's a long history in Western-ish democracies of democratic erosion when the economy turns sour. And there's a lot fewer cases where voters put back, voluntarily, decent sort of decentralized power from the executive, or put in power someone who would decentralize power from the executive branch because the economy is doing well. So the historical cases here are pretty pessimistic. But see, the if you want to do the math, right, like people who said the economy was the most important thing to them, it's about 40% of the voters in Virginia. They move, incredibly in the Democratic direction, but it's still probably accounting for like 80% of the swing against Republicans in the state. So there is still, I'm not trying to say the democracy issue doesn't matter. I'm just saying for most voters, this is still secondary. Unfortunately, they don't perceive politics the way that you and I perceive politics, which is, as sort of something to be valued, and pro democracy values sort of overriding our partisan attachments and what we need from politics on a day to day level, thanks to our privilege, maybe. But
Yeah.
it does still matter to a lot of folks. The Orban case is really interesting because Donald Trump and Viktor Orban today have the same exact approval rating, about 41%. Actually, Trump's trending down. He might be at 40% by the weekend, or below. Uh, but these are, we think of Viktor Orban as an autocrat, someone who takes power partly because of the economy, but also because of scapegoating. Sort of remakes the country's constitution in an anti-democratic way, and like purges the free press, right, of accountability for the executive. And everything that he's done lands him in the position, sort of the exact position that Trump's in today, in the eyes of the public. So that it's telling that they're hanging out together. They're probably very good examples for each other and the trajectories that Trump might take over the next couple of years. Um, the probably the best silver lining for Trump right now is that the Supreme Court might take away his power to levy tariffs, which might box him in on economics and give Republicans in Congress cover for basically fixing all the mistakes he's made.
Yeah, I don't know. The Trump not having the power of tariffs, and not being able to make inflation even worse with tariffs might actually help the economy and help him politically. You know what I mean. I'm not sure that his use of this tariff power that he has just sort of grabbed is getting him very far in terms of fixing anything in the economy. You know what I mean?
There's lots of
And
own goals there, and yeah, I mean, I am being,
the Supreme Court might save him from
I'm
himself in a sense.
I'm making like a half of a joke. So
but
let me make
But I
this
know what you mean.
really.
I know, I get it. I get it. Wait, but
Uh,
let me ask you one question about Virginia, though. And again, very tough to disentangle. Um, how much do you think the poor quality of the Republican gubernatorial candidate mattered versus just the anti-incumbent mood we're sort of talking about as the basic issue here?
well, Abigail Spanberger does about a point better than Mikey Sherrill on margin. So maybe it matters for a point worth. That might be a rough approximation. Jack Ciattarelli, contrary to lots of the really bad low IQ punditry from before the election, Jack Ciattarelli is not actually a good candidate in Virginia. He's a three-peat loser. Sorry, in New
New
Jersey,
Jersey.
he's a three-peat loser, right? So the if we're saying he's a good candidate, and so Winsome Sears is your model of a
No,
bad
they were
candidate,
both bad candidates.
they're both bad. They're both bad candidates. So that's gonna play. That's gonna play into this, right? But I think that gives Democrats this sort of advantage if they're going to hold up these new leaders in their states as models. It's it just sort of works out in their favor. I don't know. Maybe it's worth a couple points. There's really not a whole lot of voters who are out there who are really paying attention to the quality of the candidates' performance in debates these days. And I live in Virginia, so the thing that I knew about Winsome Earl Sears, if I'm only watching the TV, is that she like had a couple of really funnily expressed lines at a speech once, the I am speaking thing. That's really that's probably what most low engagement voters knew about her if
Yeah.
they didn't know.
You raised the question of the polling error in New Jersey, and I feel like polling in New Jersey giving Republicans a false sense of hope has been something that has been going on for 25 years. I remember this. I remember in 2000, Karl Rove pointing to polls in New Jersey, trying to argue that George W. Bush was going to win the state. And I don't know if it's been consistent, but I feel like once every few elections, New Jersey is just much tighter and gives Republicans this sense that they're going to win the state. Um, does that one does that track what the hell's going on with New Jersey? And then just talk about the polling error in general this time around in Jersey and elsewhere.
Let me do a bit of expectation setting here for the performance of the
Yeah.
polls. So,
Yeah.
average error in the polls is for an off-year governor elections about 4 points in Virginia, about 4.5 points in New Jersey. That's to say, you should have expected either candidate to do 4 points better than their polling average. Um, in New Jersey, it looks like the error is closer to 6 points if you used the 50 plus one average that I've calculated with my colleagues at 50 plus one dot news, or it's higher if you pay attention to Real Clear Politics, which had Mikey Sherrill just doing 3 points better than Ciattarelli. And it's 1 point or 2 points in Virginia. So we got a better than average performance in Virginia despite the overperformance. At the governor level, at the AG level, it's about the same. It's about 3 points, and we have a worse than average performance in New Jersey. These sort of cancel each other out. So the biggest thing that I talk about in terms of the polls, what I write about in my book, is that people just have expectations that are way too high.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think there's a tendency in the sort of like 2010, 2014 Nate Silver perfect predictions of the election era that really cement high expectations for the polls and in the media and people
Yeah.
who pay attention to polls, and that's just not the case. But okay, quickly. So, what is the reason for these errors? Right. It seems like there's higher error among the pollsters who were adjusting their surveys so that they were representative of the past presidential election. I'll try
Hmm.
to explain that. So today, if you call 100,000 people on their phone, then maybe half of a percentage point of them might answer. So you'll get a poll of 500 people. The rest of the 900, or 99,500 people who did not respond to your poll are very different than the people who you do get on the phone to answer surveys. They're different demographically, they're different politically, and they're different in terms of how likely they are to engage in elections. Pollsters for a long time, they know how to solve the problem of the demographic unrepresentativeness. We know that some, X percent of voters in Virginia are white, so make your sample X percent white, or X percent are have a college degree. Just adjust the sample that you get so that it's an X percent college degree. But we don't know what the political benchmark of an off-year election should be. We don't know how Democratic or Republican it should be. So even if you fix all the demographics of the poll, if there's a residual, leftover political bias within all those demographic groups, there's no way to solve for that unless you make a guess. And this is what pollsters do
Right.
every time they do an election poll. They're guessing about the percent of the population that is sort of Republican. And you can do that. You can say, these people, X percent should be registered Republican on the voter file, or X percent should have a Republican identification. Most of the time, it's X percent voted for Donald Trump in the last election. And this works in presidential elections, but in my case, this is what I said before the election, this is the wrong thing to do in an off-year election when we know that the composition of the electorate has changed, that Republicans aren't going to participate as much because they're not as engaged in politics anymore. And by forcing the poll to match the result of the 2024 election in terms of its the composition of previous Trump voters, you have rigged it against Democrats, essentially. So there are some pollsters we caught doing this ahead of time and said this is probably bad, but let's wait and see what the outcome is. Now that we know what the outcome is, I think we have a pretty good idea this is the wrong thing to do.
Yeah. All right. Elliot, let's just quickly talk about California and and Prop 50. Um, that you know, is that what explains the blowout there? Is it does the economy explain things like propositions that go against the ideology of the incumbent party, or is it something different?
So just give me 1 second to make sure I get the margins correct before I say what I'm about to say. I believe the 50 margin is higher than Kamala Harris's vote margin in the state. Someone can fact check me on that. Um, but no, I mean it is
It
a
would,
valid.
yeah,
And it's slightly higher, right? Like 5 points or something. It is it is not surprising that a state
yeah,
that has
63. I think I'm looking at the final numbers here from the California official California results. Basically 64-36.
yeah. So just hold on.
Yeah, I'll look it up too.
Yeah, so somewhat significantly better than Kamala Harris's vote margin, and uh, basically exactly what Joe Biden's was in 2020. So it's not surprising that if in California voters are thinking actually less about inflation than they are in a state with a governor that's constantly running affordability ads at them, that the traditional Democratic voting patterns in the state might dominate, and the election result look more like 2020 than 2024. I think it's really that election is much more about partisanship than it is about the affordability crisis. You're voting for you're literally voting for a partisan outcome, right? Do you want Democrats to win more seats?
Right.
If you're a Democrat, you're going to vote yes. It really has no bearing on inflation. So that might be my take there.
Yeah. All right. I know you got to go and you have some obligations, so I want to get you out of here. But just final takeaway about these results and the implications for the midterms. I know we shouldn't overinterpret these results, but what's what do you think the main takeaway for the two parties should be as they head into next year's midterm?
Cool. One takeaway, always easy. Look, I think the thing that I've been trying to argue to people over the last year is that they have read far too much into the 2024 election and into Donald Trump's theory of why he won in particular, and Republicans spin on why he won, right?
Yeah.
A Republican pollster is the most prominent theorist for or sort of proponent of the realignment theory in American politics. We should take his ideology into account and his own incentives for that. And it's very similar to what Donald Trump says. He's representing a new type of American for the Republican Party. Yeah, but it's also equally probably much more likely that he won because of inflation. and he won because of a sort of bad campaign run by Democrats that's criticized for being anti-democratic, and elevating a candidate that lots of Democrats did not want. And this is just all to say that I want people to start thinking about elections not as sort of single, determined by single factors that align with their beliefs, but as really complex. And when you do that, it becomes much easier to see that Donald Trump's victory is not inherent to him, that he doesn't have this sort of mandate that he tries to claim, that he's not a sort of popular leader with a very popular policy agenda, that in fact most polls showed before the election that his policy agenda was underwater. So probably he won because of other reasons, right? And if his policy agenda is underwater, this is where I'll talk about 26. If his policy agenda is underwater, if the reason that he won is not because he won, but because another candidate lost, then our conclusion for 2026 should be that it should be a normal thermostatic backlash to the incumbent's president, potentially on steroids because of how unpopular his policy agenda is. There is evidence that when a president moves policy more toward the right or to the left, there's a more pronounced thermostatic backlash in American politics. So, look, this is what I've been writing on my Substack for a couple months now. He's not a popular guy. The 2025 elections are a manifestation of the backlash to that. And maybe we'll be wrong, but it looks like Democrats are pretty comfortably in the driver's seat for the next election.
Great way to end. Elliot, thank you so much for breaking this down. You're always a voice of clarity, and your clarity and your lack of hyperbole in your analysis is always greatly appreciated by me. I read you very closely, and I hope everyone who's watching this does too. And let's do this again soon. Really appreciate it.
Okay, thanks.
All right, take care. Bye, everyone.